Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. As I always start out, the Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right. They got it right again and again and again and again. And this week just absolutely proved how correct they have been. This segment, well, let me stop a second and restart. So here's the restart. Hit that restart button. Here's the restart. The restart is this, is that today we are going to talk about the State of the Union address by President Donald Trump, just not like every other pundit has. What I'm going to do is what I submitted when asked on a suggestion for or points, which I think every citizen got the same email. It was a fundraiser kind of email anyway. But I did. I took the time, and in everything that I answered other, and it gave you the place to then explain what the other was that you were interested in the president talking about. My other that I kept putting in there was mentioning that I recommended that President Trump would take and pull out the critical items in George Washington's farewell address and bring those key elements into the points of what's going on and what needs to happen. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because I'm sitting there listening to that address and I'm going, my goodness, the comparisons that can be made there are most excellent. Now, we're not going to be able to get through everything today because both addresses, the George Washington farewell address, as many of you know, if you haven't read it, the reference has been on my site forever, and it is also that you could look at it in the archives at samueladamsreturns.net. And you go to the archive for today's program, and you will see the link there to George Washington's farewell address, as well as the link for the full text of, yes, the president's speech. Now, I am not taking it necessarily at this moment because it's going to be an effort to merge those two together in such a way that I can show that comparison, but I think I'm going to do it. I'm not going to think. I already made up my mind, is that I'm going to take today's program and next week's program, unless something wild and crazy happens. I'm going to take next week's program and go through this whole point of George Washington's farewell address and where Donald Trump actually has common ground in what he said during that State of the Union. So that is why, one of the reasons, that is why the Democrats absolutely hate, first off, you and me, and they hate this president because he has so many principles that are in alignment with George Washington in the fundamentals of governance that are established in the farewell address, that are the common fundamentals that I point out to you all the time right here. These books right here, these are all about the Constitution with all of the other backup data and all of that. I keep pointing them out to you. The Founders Constitution, University of Chicago, and probably hardly anybody takes and looks for them, let alone looks at them. So that's why I'm here, to explain some of that to you. And how many volumes is that? Let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all about 700 pages, 8.5 by 11, and all of that is online. Okay? And if you and this is what the enemy, so I'm going to say this again before I get into my first point. I'm going to say this emphatically. Okay? Listen very closely. This is what's very important. It is important to understand why Barack Obama was at the University of Chicago. Yeah, you've heard me say it before. University of Chicago is the entity that published the Founders' Constitution, as well as they hold the largest number of volumes of the Anti-Federalist Papers. So let's take a look at all of the enemy that are at and have been at the University of Chicago. Now, I will distract for a moment because on an economic perspective, when you look at the Chicago School of Economics, very, very conservative slash open market, fair market, not necessarily free market, fair market teachings in economics. So I think that's critical to understand. But the access to information, original documents, and truth to be able to, what Sun Tzu says, understand your enemy, is exactly why the Rahm Emanuels and all of those others that are some of, not all, because the others are over in Berkeley, all the other communists, but there's a strong communist pull at the University of Chicago because they sat down and, in my opinion, again, as you well know, I'm not very opinionated, but in my studied opinion, what they have done to operate and put into function the Kozak plan is the need to understand all of those various components that it would require to use the Constitution, which the Anti-Federalists argued about and pointed out the flaws in the Constitution, to use the Constitution against itself and against all of the citizens in these United States. Now, our protection has always been federalism, but they also worked into the local and state levels to destroy federalism, I'm talking too fast, too much to say, to destroy federalism by taking in, looking at how they corrupted each and every state all the way down to the local level. And there's so many things we can talk about. One of the simple examples is HUD. Every county in the state of Ohio has a HUD, Housing and Urban Development Group, that really takes its marching orders right from the federal HUD because they get their money from them. Therefore, they try to push things down to the city and county levels that are destructive to personal and private property. You can go check out Tom DeWeese on some of the things that he's talking about, where now HUD, through the counties, is taking and wanting to get rid of single-family dwellings and to change here. Over the last year, I found out by one of the board members on HUD, who is a solid patriot, is that HUD came down with over a year ago telling the director of HUD in our county that she needed to take and figure out a plan to go in and persuade all of the townships and the county zoning departments to reduce property sizes so that everything would be small plots for only duplexes, condominiums, and maybe some houses. So any city, any county, any township that buys off onto a HUD plan like that is out to destroy our property rights. Oh, and then the rest of it is all of the parks, to take away all of the land that people have and put it into parks and then jam everybody into these things. But that, go check out Tom DeWeese's site on that. So here's the other critical, I said that was most important. Here's the critical point that I drive home every day and we missed on this past weekend across America in the churches. There may have been a few churches out there because, you know, I can't get to every church, nor can you or anybody else. But the moral depravity that is allowed within Christianity at this very moment in time is an acceptance of the cult of Molech, is an acceptance of infanticide. So those pastors that did not even mention that in prayer, I wonder, what are you thinking? And I know so many that didn't mention it in prayer and did not mention it in sermons, did not call out the evil that is before us right now. I have to say, thank you, Lord Jesus, that Donald Trump had the capacity, integrity, and spirit to call it out during his State of the Union address. Call out the infanticide. I will refer at this moment back to the other thing that I'm doing. I call it a thing, the reading that I'm doing to my grandkids. And I'm going to remind you of it again. There's a tab on SamuelAdamsReturns.net so you can read and watch videos and get the link to the original book, Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution. We were able to form this nation because we were of one mind across every denomination to take and honor the living God and understand the forefront of liberty and move towards being a moral people. If you can't get there, get out of the frickin' pulpit, because that's what you've done. You've turned it into a whorehouse by not standing on the morality, truth of everything that is Reformation built, was built in the foundation of this country. You know, I was reading some more on Dr. Dwight, who became the president of Yale. And at the time that he went there, that Yale even went into what it is today: debauchery, sin, evil, gambling, and all of those things. It took men who went through the revolution, who understood what it meant to bring together the moral substance of a nation, moral substance of their church, to communicate it and say there's no differentiation between biblical moral truth and governance at a personal and political level. We have not done that. The churches do not do that right now. So that is the reason, that is just the common reason that we are in the pickle we're in. You know, thank God for Donald Trump. He ain't the perfect guy, but you know what? We needed someone that could pick up the sword and fight back the evil, because immediately what we have seen, what we have observed, is that the ideologies of evil have come out. They understand everything that I'm pointing at in those books behind me that are there at the University of Chicago, and they immediately start saying, well, that's not what the Constitution says, and that's not how the Constitution works, and oh, Donald Trump is against the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. You know what? No, he's not. They know how to manipulate it because you, and I'm not talking to the listening audience necessarily here on Liberty Works Radio Network, who is the primary sponsor for this program. No, I'm talking about anybody that is listening to this on YouTube. You do not understand and know the foundation of this nation, nor do you know or understand how our republic is supposed to function under constitutionalism, and what those founding pastors, what they believed, what they preached. Ladies and gentlemen, the first point of today's program is what John Adams, Madison, and others said, is that this Constitution is only for a moral and virtuous people. And as we get into George Washington, we're going to hear that very, very clearly. As we get into Trump's speech, we're going to hear it summarized. And the one that brought it out first and foremost was Samuel Adams. and Samuel Adams will return in the next segment. And yes, those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns, Those Anti-Federalists. They did absolutely get it right. And this is Tom Novolis, your host, and I want to give a great thank you to Liberty Works Radio Network for having me on the network. Here on Saturdays, I get 2 time slots, 9 o'clock in the morning and again at 7 p.m. I am so delighted to be here. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot of work to put a program together. And those that are on live programming during the week, folks, check out the other programming because they do a lot of good work. It is an effort to put something together that tries to bring truth to you. So go in there, check out the other hosts and hostesses here on Liberty Works Radio Network, and look for that donate button. Hit that donate button because this is, yes, a listener-funded network. And it's important. It's important that we understand what that means as we look at what is moral governance. I'm going to go through a little bit more today than just Donald Trump's speech. I do want to take and give a heavy emphasis on George Washington's farewell address. But let me open it with this aspect of things. From the speech, basically the second body paragraph talking about meeting together or meeting tonight of unlimited potential. And that's what George Washington talked about. He talked about in his farewell address that after going through these first 8 years of operating under a constitutional republic form of government, that there was unlimited potential for the United States. Absolutely. Now, he also talked about that we need to be ready to achieve historic breakthroughs for all Americans. George Washington talked about exactly the same thing in his farewell address. Did he use those exact words? I don't know, maybe. Pretty darn close in some things. One of the things that he addressed, definitely from the SCOTUS perspective, if you will, is that we govern not as two parties, but as a nation. We will see, probably not this week, but next week. George Washington absolutely warned against party politics. He warned against the factions that we have today. He warned against them. And so we have here, we're not supposed to govern by party politics. We're supposed to govern under the ideas of a constitutional republic and a rule of law, to substantiate all that is within the context of individual republics called a state. And from that, come together in an appropriate manner, which was destroyed by the 17th Amendment and is continuously under assault, as George Washington will talk about, by none other than something that Donald Trump talked about in the last portion of the speech, is ideologies, and the ideology of socialism, the cabals, and the destruction of how we should govern. Uncanny. Not that there's word-for-word comparisons, but what are the principles? What are the principles upon which this nation should substantially function? Sam Adams brought those out very beginning, way back in 1746, when he was talking about liberty. He was talking about sedition. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have going on right now with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff, Bernie Sanders, and a whole cadre other. I won't even mention the little communist woman from New York, loud-mouthed, evil-eyed woman from New York, they are spewing ideologies of sedition. Okay? That's what it is. And I'm sorry, but the general public does not understand what that is because of the corrupt manner in which those seditious, evil ideologies and people have taken and manipulated. And for those that are on the radio program, those on YouTube can see me pointing once again to my books and references of the Founders' Constitution, because those people in the Democrat Party have schooled themselves so much better than the general population to understand how to subvert and be seditious in the functional operation of our constitutional republic. With that, we must continue to look at some of these things. So Trump was saying that, once again, President Trump mentioned it is the agenda of the American people. George Washington will talk about that. He said that the campaign made core promises. Many of us, many of those that ran for office, if you will, even the Democrats, manipulating the language, manipulating the message, manipulating the Founders' Constitution, said that they were being elected to defend America jobs, demand fair trade for workers, rebuild and revitalize our infrastructure, reduce prices in healthcare and prescription drugs. George Washington didn't talk about that. He did talk about the next one, create an immigration system that's safe, lawful, modern, and secure. George Washington talks about that. So, and he talks about to pursue a foreign policy that puts American interests first. George Washington absolutely talks about America first. You know, there you go. Right there. That's why the socialists, communists, Muslims, and everybody else that are part of the now modern Democrat Party are against even our founding fathers. Because our founding fathers looked at liberty, Christianity, and all that brings together humanity in a way that is sustainable in every aspect of life. They hate it because, as my dad always says, they work for the devil. They work for the devil. Well, that's the easy way to say it. But the fact is that their ideologies are perverse. Their ideologies are manipulative. Their ideologies are hate-driven. Their ideologies can be summed up very simply in another term that takes in, well, two terms, that is derived from Marxism, and the second word that is the derivative is neo-Marxism. Every one of those ideologies of those within the Democrat Party, and sad to say, the Never-Trumpers, are falling within those same two categories. Yes, the Republican Party does have neo-Marxists within the Republican Party. Can't help it. All right, let's move on. I think that, yeah, maybe you'll get it. So that's just not even into the first page, of things here. Not even the first page. Save our victory and winning for our country. Victory is not winning for a party, it's winning for the country. We're here to save our civilization from tyranny, our civilization, American made, saved American freedom, transformed science, redefined the middle class, on and on. Okay, I'll finish the first page here and then we'll get into George Washington. We can make our communities safe, families stronger, our culture richer, our faith deeper, and our middle class bigger and more prosperous than ever before. We must reject revenge politics, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and common good. That's basically page 1 of the speech. So let's get over here. George Washington, this is his farewell address in 1796. He's speaking to friends and fellow citizens. He talks about his wanting to retire, that it was time for him to retire, and he is here that is a strict regard to all the considerations appertaining to the relation which binds a dutiful citizen to his country. Binds a dutiful citizen to his country. All of these things, that's what he's going to talk about, is all of the things that bind us as dutiful citizens to our country. That's the premise of this, okay? And even led to the preparation of an address that he wanted to declare, but the mature reflection on the then perplexed and critical posture of our affairs with foreign nations and the numerous advice of persons entitled to my confidence impelled me to abandon the idea. So this is what he was going to do from the last election, when he was, he only expected to be in office only one term. And he was going to write this type of address then as a farewell address for all his years of dedicated service. He talks about the whole idea right from the beginning, in that I have consolation to believe that while choice and prudence invite me to quit the political science, patriotism does not forbid it. So, you know what? That's very, very critical to understand. And that unceasing vows that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of its beneficence. He calls upon God, the living God of the Bible, right from the beginning, all the time. You see, you can't govern. And I have fear and trepidation, so I don't know how far we're going to get here. We're going to get into the third segment. We've got 2 minutes left, Kath. Yeah, so we have about 2 minutes left. I have fear and trepidation for congregations that pastors who have no clear understanding of the chaplains and clergy of the Revolution to try and talk about theonomy or anything relative to biblical political science when they do not understand the fundamental foundation that the pastors and clergy, chaplains and clergy of the Revolution understood from a biblical Reformation perspective. So when George Washington was calling on providence, and when he was calling on the definition of that understanding in a prudent manner, he was doing so from that perspective of those foundational leaders in the churches who prepared the people to understand liberty. Liberty, with its full source being first in Jesus Christ. And then how that becomes extensible within the family, even more so, extensible in one's personal life. That means doing what God wants you to do in every aspect of your life. Then as it transcends into the family, and then as it moves into the community, and then as it moves into governance over all. Ladies and gentlemen, every political person is supposed to be an acknowledging agent of God's divine providence over all creation. That's where we missed it. That's where the churches, as I always say, the anti-federalists knew what the federalists thought is that the churches would always produce a moral and virtuous people from which moral and virtuous leaders would come. And the anti-federalists said, no. Sam Adams said, no. Man is sinful, and to the extent that if we do not produce and have in place significant laws of morality in the first place, everything else would degenerate. Yep, right here in this speech, that's exactly what George Washington talks about as well. And as I just mentioned, Sam Adams brings it out first, all the way back in the early 1700s. And the Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right. Come on back for the next segment, and we'll cover this some more. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third and last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely got it correct. You thought I was going to say right. Well, yeah, they got it right, but they absolutely got it correct by definition of the word, that is. So we were finishing up with the idea that all political people, all elected people, if they truly understood what the chaplains and the clergy were teaching at the time of the revolution, is that based on true Reformation biblical teaching, which there's only, a number of churches that ascribe to that, is the fundamental that every person, every one of us, first and foremost, is responsible for all our action and activities, whether you're a business person or a bureaucrat or a political leader. You're ultimately responsible to God, and through His holy word is where you should go get your wisdom. Nope. What we have going on is we have all of the garbage that is in education, to the extent that everybody thinks they're their own God, instead of understanding that every one of us was created by and for God for the distinct purposes of governing according to His purposes. It's an interesting topic. That's the simplicity of theonomy, is that, first off, that we have self-rule, that we have that clear understanding that we are responsible for and unto the living God of the universe in such a manner that everything we do is for Him and unto Him. Now, what's that got to do with George Washington? George Washington understood that. He understood that, as I mentioned already, is that as a strong incitement to unceasing vows, that ceasing vow, that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of its benevolence, that your union and brotherly affection may be perpetual, that the free constitution, which is the work of your hands, may be sacredly maintained, and its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue. You see, that comes under God, because the only place you're going to get wisdom and virtue is to understand the fundamentals of that. And he says it's administration in every department. Wow. Hey, how about that? Trump was saying, where's my 300 people that I'm still trying to get into those administrative jobs? Every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue, instead of the ideologies of the neo-Marxists that we have in government right now. Okay. That, in fine, the happiness of the people of these states, under the auspices of liberty, may be completed by so careful preservation and so prudent a use of this blessing as will acquire to them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection, and adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. The expectation was that in foreign policy and everything else, that this idea of a constitutionalism within the context of a republic, not democracy, okay? And even you Republicans that use democracy you are ignorant and insulting to the likes of George Washington. But you don't care. You don't give a rip. But if you take just this paragraph alone, and we could spend a lot of time dissecting it, every administration was to, or every administrative department was to have understanding of wisdom and virtue is how it's supposed to operate. We don't have that. We have people who think they are everything unto themselves. So the fact of the matter is that, we've got a lot of problems. And it goes back to what the Anti-Federalists were saying, is that the pulpits at one point in time would not do their jobs. Okay. So he continues on. The interesting aspect, too, is that every nation which gets a stranger to our form of government, constitutional republicanism, is what we should definitely be looking to promote and preserve first within our own nation, and then to make it available. Not to go out there and jam it down somebody's throat. Make it available, but we have to exercise it according to what he was talking about just in these first few paragraphs. We have to exercise it in such a manner that people want it. Hey, pastors, that's no different than people wanting to exercise the beliefs of Christianity. If you guys had any leadership, and if you did it in such a way that people wanted it because it was the totality of all that Jesus said it should be in every aspect of life, and lived it accordingly. Hey, anyway. Let's see. He goes, perhaps he should stop, but a solicitude for your welfare. So a concern for our welfare, which cannot end but with his life. So he was going to hold this concern for our welfare to his dying day. And the apprehension of danger natural to that solicitude. So his concern and the apprehension, the understanding of the dangers that are out there. And here's where he lays it out. Okay? And I may only have enough time to cover this paragraph and maybe a portion of a small paragraph. He says that this natural solicitude urge me on an occasion like the present to offer your solemn contemplation and to recommend to your frequent review. So, something? This speech should have been, this letter, this address should have been something that we have been studying from the day that it was given. Frequent review. Some sentiments which are the result of much reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, and which appear to me all important to the primacy of your felicity as a people, that your happiness as a people. These will be offered to you with the more freedom, as you can only see in them the disinterested warnings of a parting friend who can possibly have no personal motive to bias his counsel. Nor can I forget, as an encouragement to it, your indulgent reception of my sentiments on a former and not dissimilar occasion. Interwoven is a love of liberty. A love of liberty. Sam Adams started talking about liberty and sedition, like I said, way back in 1746, before George Washington was even born. Okay? So he says, is a love of liberty with every ligament of your hearts, every beat, every ligament, everything that makes your heart hold together. This is where liberty needs to be. No recommendation of mine is necessary to fortify or confirm the attachment. Sorry, George. Today it is. Donald Trump's speech talks about that. So unity of government, which constitutes you as one people, is also now dear to you. Wow. Not anymore. Not anymore, because of the ideological perversion that is out there. And he talks about this. He talks about it. for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, is that unity, to support your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, and of that very liberty which you so highly prize. Holy smokes, those are some of the things right at the beginning of Trump's speech. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed, that means all sorts of trickery, all sorts of lies, all sorts of deception, employed to weaken your minds the conviction of that truth that he just spoke about in reference to liberty. And that's what the democrats, they are demons, liars, deceivers, ideological perverts. Anyway, he brings it out. Many artifices employed to weaken your minds, snowflakes, of the convictions of that truth. As this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously, directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. All right, I have to stop at a second here and go back in these last few remaining minutes. He lays it out. He lays it out very, very simplistically to that which we have not listened to in any manner, and the cries of those in the wilderness. Out here, I feel like I'm out crying in the wilderness very, very often. He lays it out very clearly, is that we would be attacked and that we would have these political forces coming against us, even on our points against our political fortress, and we would be attacked by batteries of internal and external enemies against our liberties, actively, through, often covertly and insidiously directed. Bernie Sanders, the crazy bug-eyed communist woman from New York, the bug-eyed communist from California, the other bug-eyed from up in Vermont, all of these people, and more so, all of the other ones that were dancing and high-fiving themselves in white during this president's speech. Yes, we all got it. It wasn't necessarily for the acknowledgement of what the president had to say, and I think Rush Limbaugh covered that very well. I think it was like on Wednesday of this week, where he actually covered that whole idea that that was self-serving in what they did. But President Trump, in his wisdom and thoughtfulness, was able to wrap them in to ways that it's interesting. But the warning here. So what I challenge you with for this week, because we have a lot to cover, and that's barely into the first of 8 pages of the farewell address. And that's barely into the first page of 10 pages of the Trump address. We have been under attack. Many of us know that. Those that listen to this program know that. The ability to communicate within the context of that is extremely difficult. There is no way to have a civil conversation any longer. And I think there's a Prager University video out on that that is very, very good. The ideology is sick, it's evil, it's destructive. So your challenge, here's your to-do. Your to-do this week is to go to the references at samueladamsreturns.net and to take and download, or at least open up, these 2 documents. Preferably, I'd like you to start with George Washington's farewell address. read it. Do what he said. Reflect on it. Start understanding it and studying it, because it all drives back to our liberties, which Samuel Adams talked about and promoted from the very beginning of his career. And yes, those anti-federalists got it right. We'll see you again next week as we continue this conversation.